Last week, we were lucky enough to catch up, again with Ernest Greene. We caught up with him last year in December at the Meredith Music Festival, and at that point, he still hadn't signed with a label and was kind of holding off for as long as he could because he didn't want there to be any pressure to finish the album. So we began the chat by asking him why he decided to settle with Sub Pop.
Well, I grew up learning the guitar at probably the age of 12 or 13, and all the sub pop, like grunge bands, were what I was really into. So I was already a big fan of the label, and they were one of the only labels that really was in constant contact over the course of like six months to a year. They were just always reaching out and checking in, and I really appreciated that. And it just really shone through that they were big fans and were really excited about the record.
We're just about to put out your debut album through Sub Pop in the States. Having released only EPs previously, given this was your first full-length and you'd never written one before, how did you decide to approach it?
It was pretty tough, mainly because when I'm writing, it's a very kind of mindless approach where I try not to guide the music in any way. So where my previous work was just a collection of songs, I really wanted to kind of have this record, make sense from a big picture perspective and have a natural flow to it. And so it took a while for the songs to finally come together. And once I figured out sort of a core palette of sounds that I would use, everything really started to fall into place. But it was definitely a learning experience, having never written a 40-minute piece of music before.
I read that you really wanted the record to be balanced. Can you explain a bit more about what you meant by that and how did you go about achieving that balance?
Well, I take from a lot of different influence, like genre influences, and so I didn't want this record to be a dance record or an indie rock record. I kind of wanted it to sort of fit somewhere in between all of these different genres, and so that was sort of the idea that I kind of put constraints on. So if I used like a heavy kind of drum sound that might sound like dance music, I really wanted to balance that with strings or more live instrumentation, like a bass guitar or something, to sort of balance those influences out. One of my favorite records of all time is like Radiohead's OK Computer, which is obviously a much different type of music than what I make, but I loved how just the ebb and flow of the record from beginning to end, where there's highs and lows, and it's really dramatic, and those are just the records that I'm drawn to. And while there's I don't want to compare my record to a Radiohead record, but that was something I was trying to do. I feel like I'm much better prepared to sort of do that again moving forward on the next record I work on.
We spoke to Ernest and asked whether or not this hip-hop approach to sampling is still important to him as a producer.
Definitely. I still think about writing songs much like a hip-hop producer would, where I think in terms of loops, and I sit down on the computer and we'll just layer loops on top of loops, and then at a later time we'll kind of go through and edit and build the song with these. It's almost like putting together a puzzle. You have all of these different blocks, and you can kind of build the song with. And even if I'm sitting down at a piano or on a guitar, I'm still thinking about the song in that way. So I don't know if I'll ever be able to move away from that.
And I guess in the beginning, when you were releasing the EPs and those sort of tour CDs, there was definitely associations with kind of like a sense of nostalgia in that sort of faded, synthetic, sort of early pop sound that was being produced and explored. And I guess obviously there's a more, as we mentioned, like refined sound on this record, but still, I think implicit maybe a sense of nostalgia. Do you think that that's just an aesthetic quality or a virtue that you are really drawn to, whether subconsciously or consciously?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a subconscious thing where that type of song is just natural to me. And, as I mentioned before, the process of writing is very mindless, and that's really what I enjoy about it, is kind of getting lost in the process. And it's funny to me that I can kind of sit down at any instrument, whether it's computer or a piano or guitar, and these types of sounds just naturally happen. So, yeah, try not to analyze it too much and just let it happen.
Ernest, you're well known for your bedroom recordings, but this new album sees you stepping into the studio for the first time. You recorded Within and Without with Ben Allen, who, among many great other things, co-produced Animal Collective's Merriweather Post Pavilion and also Deer Hunter's Halcyon Digest. How did you find that experience going into the studio?
It was a lot of fun, but I was definitely a little skeptical about it. I knew that I needed help, and that the songs that I was writing were much bigger and more dynamic, and luckily Ben was an easy person to get along with and kind of understood where I was coming from. I think had I worked with anyone else, it would have been a completely different process, because I'm a self-taught producer and really don't have the vocabulary of a classically trained producer, and so I tend to speak in these very broad, kind of abstract terms, and he was really great at interpreting them. It was definitely a collaboration. He brought to the table, and the record would have sounded a lot different without him.
You've said in the past that you're a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to recording. Did you face any challenges at all, or is there anything you would do differently next time, perhaps?
Definitely. I am a perfectionist, and that was the frustrating thing about we only had 10 days together, Ben and I, and he had a pretty busy schedule, and so we ended up working like 12-hour days for 10 straight days, and there definitely were a few moments where it would have been much easier had we had a couple more days to work. I might have changed some things, but yeah, so I think looking forward, working on the next record, maybe if I had a little bit more time, it would be great. But I'm still very happy with the record, and it's definitely kind of a picture of that moment in time. That's the way I like to think of it.